Hey, this is Eric, and thanks so much for joining me for this session on Google Sheets for Educators. Before we dive in, a little bit of housekeeping first. I want to make sure you can get to the resource document for this session. You'll find that at bit.ly/Kurtz-data. That link will take you to a Google document, and that document has everything we're going to be exploring throughout the session. There's also some template files in there that you're going to want to click on so you can get your own copies of some templates that we're going to be using during the session if you would like to follow along and do these different tasks hands-on. That will let you do that. Again, bit.ly/Kurtz-data. The document that takes you to looks like this. So if you're winding up in that document, you are in the right place. A couple of quick things about that document. At the very top, you will find all of my contact information. I would love to stay in touch with you after this session. Please feel free to connect with me on my blog, email, socials, YouTube, newsletter, Facebook group, whatever the case. There's lots of different ways to stay connected there. And then on page 2 of the document, if you did want to access the slideshow, you certainly don't have to, but just heads up, you can view it or make a copy of the slideshow there. And then on that page also is where those templates are that I mentioned we'd be exploring. And then the rest of the document, just all the stuff that we're going to be doing, all the things we're going to be getting into in this session. So hopefully that will get you where you need to be for all of that. And one more time, that is bit.ly/Kurtz-data. Awesome. All right. Well, with that said, let's talk about what we're going to be doing in this session. So this is a session where we're going to take a look at using Google Sheets specifically as an educator, whether a teacher, administrator, guidance counselor, librarian, whatever the case might be. But that'll be the focus is from more of an educational point of view. But it's really going to be about all the nuts and bolts of using the tool. We're going to hit a lot of stuff, as much as I can squeeze in the time we have here. Sorting, filtering, formulas, charts and graphs, conditional formatting, data validation. Hopefully we'll even get up to pivot tables. So an awful lot of stuff that we're going to be exploring throughout this session. If you have not used Google Sheets before, if this is kind of new to you, you're in the right place. That's really what this is designed for, is to help take you from square one up a few spots as you get more comfortable with using this tool. Now, if you have used Google Sheets before, I still hope you will pick up some neat tips and tricks and some things throughout this session as well. I use Sheets definitely every day, one way or another. It has become such a valuable tool to help me stay organized and to help me manage so many tasks that I need to do. I hope you will find it being the same for you. All right, so let's go ahead and mention again real quick about getting those templates. If you haven't done that yet, this would be a good time to do so. You can either go to page 2 of the agenda and give a click on Student Data Template 1 and 2, or you can always use these bit.ly links as well. They will accomplish the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and give a click on template number 1 right now, and it'll ask if I want a copy. I'll say, yep, let's go ahead and do that. And then template 2, I'm not going to do that just yet. Assuming we have time to get to that, then I'll come back around and we'll pull up template number 2. But template 1 is where we're going to begin, and a large amount of our content will be focused there. Just a quick overview of what you're going to see in this template. It's all pretend data, so no real student data or anything like that here. This is all just made up. But it's basically a spreadsheet with students' names, grade level, ID, address, phone number, class period, whether they ride the bus or not, and their last 6 scores in this imaginary class that we're in. So that's the data we're going to be playing around with for our examples. This may not reflect the type of data you deal with on a day-to-day basis, but hopefully the concepts we cover you can apply to whatever data you work with. All right. Well, with that said, let's go ahead and get on into it. Our first topic we're going to talk about is view options. And we're going to talk about things like zooming and resizing rows and columns and freezing rows and columns. And basically what I mean when I talk about view options is just trying to get the spreadsheet to balance basically two things. One is trying to fit as much on the screen at once as possible, because I think that's helpful. I think the more data you can look at once, the better. But balancing that with actually being able to read it, because you get too much in there and it's all small font size. It might be challenging sometimes to read. And so let's talk first of all about zooming. So there's two ways to zoom your spreadsheet. You can use the little zoom menu that you see up here on the top left, where I could zoom in to whatever percentage I prefer, making that text larger than text and numbers larger. It doesn't change the menus though, it just changes what's in the spreadsheet here. So that zoom is only affecting the contents of the spreadsheet, not the actual menus. There is another zoom. I'm in Chrome. This would be very similar in other browsers, but in Chrome, if I go up to my little three dots button in the top right, there's a zoom option there. This actually zooms the whole page, not just the contents of the spreadsheet. So if I zoom in and in and in, as I do that, notice it's making the spreadsheet bigger, but it's also making all my menus bigger as well. I'm going to actually do that for today just because I want to make sure you can see what I'm showing. Being that this is a recorded video, it may be a little smaller on the screen, and so anything I can do to make this a little larger, hopefully that will help you see things a little bit better here during the session. Now that's great. So we zoomed. I can now see things at a level that helps, but that brings up the need for the other things we were talking about, freezing rows and columns and resizing, because here's the first issue. Now that I've zoomed in, look what happens. If I decide I want to scroll down the page, I can do that, but suddenly, I just lost my header row at the top because it's all the way here at the top, and it tells me like, okay, which score these are and so forth. But when I scroll down, I might lose track of that. Same thing if I scroll to the right. Let's say I want to get over here and say, oh, I know there's more data over here. Let's scroll over and look at the rest of the data. Now I lost my students' names. Now I don't know who this data applies to. So one thing we can do is what's called freezing rows and columns. And there's a number of ways to do it. You pick the way that works for you. One option is if you take a look here in the top left, there's these thick gray bars here next to this blank cell that's next to column A and above row 1. Well, these thick gray bars are called freeze bars. And if I take my mouse and I put my mouse right on top of them, it changes from a pointing arrow to a hand. That means I can grab the bar and move it. So at that point, if I come up here and I click and hold down and grab the freeze bar and drag it down, now I have this thick gray bar all the way across row 1, which means it's frozen. When I scroll down, look at that. That's fantastic. The headers stay in place even though the rest of the data moves. Same thing if I grab the freeze bar that I can drag to the right. If I click, drag that one over, now the column A with the names is frozen. So if I scroll to the right, fantastic. I'm not losing my student names and the data. Same if I scroll down, I'm not losing the top header as well. So you'll often see me using freeze bars whenever I'm dealing with a large amount of data. It just makes it so much easier to not lose track of where you're at. And then the last thing I'll mention on viewing is just resizing rows and columns. So, some of these columns are definitely bigger than they need to be, like, class period or bus. That's kind of wasted space there. So I could take my mouse, and if I put it between columns F and G, for example, it changes shape again. It goes from a pointer to this back and forth arrow. Well, that's where I can click and drag, and I can adjust the size of the column. And that's a little bit more realistic. Same thing with like the bus. Another quick tip for you though, if you don't want to do the click and drag, you can just double click on that little dividing line between the two, and it will automatically pick what it thinks is the best width. So if I double click there, it'll snug that up, and if it's a little too snug, you can always just stretch it out a bit more, but that can help a lot. I can do this for multiple columns. If I grab, for example, all of these score columns and I double click at the very far right end of it, it will apply that resize to all of the columns that I just grabbed. So again, I'm clicking on the header, clicking and dragging to select them, and I'm double clicking on the dividing line here, and boom, there we go. It just snugged them all up. Same thing if I make it a little bit bigger, it'll adjust all of them for me. So the idea is you can definitely make your cells larger, smaller as need be. Like if you can't see all the address and you want to see more of it, you can stretch it over to see more or squeeze it back if you're like, nah, I don't really need to see all of that. All right, good stuff. Well, let's keep on moving. Now that we can see our data, let's do stuff with it. So one of the first things we're going to do is sorting data. And there's a lot of things we can do with sorting. For example, we can sort the data by one column. We can sort by multiple columns. Sometimes we might also need to split our text into columns before we do the sorting. We'll do all of that real quick. So let's start with the first thing, sorting by a single column. So for example, let's say I wanted to sort by this most recent score that our students had received, and I want to see who scored highest, who scored lowest, so I can figure out how to intervene. Well, sorting by one column, real simple. All you need to do is click somewhere in the column. Doesn't matter where, just as long as you click in the column by which you wish to sort. So in this case, column M, I'm just going to click in that column. Now that I've clicked in the column, I'm going to go up to my data menu. We're going to be there a lot. We're going to go to data a lot. There's lots of stuff in that menu. Well, one of the things in that menu is sort sheet. And then I can say I want to sort the entire sheet by column M. Now, how did it know I wanted to sort by column M? Because I clicked in it. That's why I clicked in that column. That way it knew that was the one I wanted to sort by. I can sort A to Z, low to high, or Z to A, high to low. So for example, if I'm doing grades, in this case, numbers, this would be low to high numbers and high to low numbers. So let's just do Z to A, high to low for a moment. Click on that. And look at that, the entire spreadsheet resorted. So now I have, my 99s and 98s at the top. I've got my 55s and 65s down at the bottom here. And everything sorted, the whole entire spreadsheet sorted, so the students' names and all of that sorted with it because it said sort sheet by that column. If I were to, let's go over here and sort the student ID numbers, for example, same thing. I could say click somewhere in column C just so it knows that's the column I'm going to sort by. Go data, sort the entire sheet by column C. Let's go A to Z, low to high. Boom, there we go. Now we've got the lowest student IDs up to the highest student IDs. So pretty easy if you're sorting by one category. Not as easy if you're doing multiple columns, but it's not bad either. It's just there's a little bit more to it. So to sort by multiple columns, what we're going to end up doing is going to our data menu, and we're going to use this thing called sort range. The problem is it's grayed out at the moment. We do have to give it the range we want to sort, and then it'll let us do this multi-column sorting. Well, so to pick the range, basically we need to select everything. We need to grab, all the columns, all the rows, because here's the thing, folks, you don't want to accidentally just grab part of it and accidentally miss some of the scores, and then you sort just this. Oh no, if that's what you sort, well then scores 5 and 6 don't get sorted with it, and now the wrong numbers are attached to the wrong students. Oh, we don't want that to happen. So here's the safest bet. If you just want to grab everything, easiest way to do that. In the top left-hand corner between column A and row 1, where this blank cell is at, if you click on that little blank gray rectangle there, boom, it grabs the whole spreadsheet. You don't have to worry about accidentally missing something. So again, it's nothing but click up in this top left-hand corner, and there you go. We've grabbed the whole spreadsheet. Now that we've selected it all, it's safe to sort it. We'll go to Data, and look at that. Sort range is now available. Perfect. So now we can sort the range we have selected. Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to Advanced Range Sorting Options. That's what I was trying to get to, is this menu here that lets us do the multi-level sorting. So there we go. Let's click Advanced Range Sorting Options. And at this point, it's going to pop up a little wizard that's going to walk us through this. The first question is, does our data have a header row? It does. We're not sorting that. We're just using that as a guide for us, because now it gives us the names from that header row, and we can decide how do we want to sort. So let's see. Let's say we want to first sort by our grade level. So we'll say, okay, let's sort by grade level from low to high, so 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. But then there's going to be ties because there's a bunch of 9th graders, 10th, 11th, and 12th. So how do we break the ties? That's where you say add another sort column. So let's say maybe for the next sort column, we're going to say, okay, let's sort by their class period. I think I had period 3 and period 7. So I want grade level first, and then where there's ties, split them up by 3rd period and 7th period. And then there's still going to be some ties, some students in the same grade and the same period. So let's add another sort column. This time, let's just do that final score we had done earlier, score 6. And of course, any of these I could go, Z to A instead of A to Z. It's just up to you as to how you want to sort them. But that's it. If I click sort now, we should get grade levels first, and then where there's ties, periods, and where there's ties, the score, their most recent score. All right, let's go ahead and hit sort and see what we get. And there we go. Here we have all of our 9th graders together, and then 10th, 11th, and 12th. Inside of the 9th graders, look at that. Here's period 3, and here's period 7. So it did do that. Within 9th graders, it made the 3rd period and 7th period people get sorted. And inside of each of those, inside of the 3rd period group, the scores do go from low to high. And the side of the 7th period group, they go from low to high as well. Perfect. So that is a multi-column sort. Last thing we're going to talk about with sorting is splitting text to columns. Now, why do I bring that up? Well, let's say that I'm all done with my sorting and I want to put this kind of like back to normal, shall we say? Well, back to normal might be sorted by the student names. Maybe we want to keep our list alphabetical. Well, look at my problem here. My student names are all in one column, so the first name and the last name are hooked together. I can't really sort by last name. If I come here and say, hey, let's sort this, sheet A to Z, it's going to sort by their first name because that's what is in the beginning of those cells. So what I need to do is say, is there a way to take this column and split it into 2 columns? So the first name is in one column and the last name is in another column. Then I could sort by the last name because it would be in its own column. Short answer is, yeah, you can do that. So let's do it. I do need to temporarily unfreeze this first column here. Now, I can use, again, the little hand to click and drag to unfreeze that. I do want to show you another way of freezing. I mentioned there are more than one way. I think the hand is the easiest way to do it. You can also do that from the View menu. You'll see there's a freeze option in the View menu where you can tell it how many rows or columns you want to freeze. So at the moment, I don't have this column frozen, which that's what I want. But let me just show you again. If I wanted to freeze the name column, instead of dragging the bar, I could go View, Freeze, and say 1 column. And then boom, there we go. It just froze the column. And if I wanted to unfreeze it, View, Freeze, no columns. And now it's unfrozen. But again, you can just do that with your mouse, but heads up, the menu does work as well. So now that I've got that unfrozen, let's do this. Let's add a blank column next to it. Why? Well, I need somewhere for the names to go. The last names, I don't want them to overwrite the grade level. Well, you can add another column so many ways. If you're a right clicker, you can just right click on the header and say insert a column to the left or right. So I could say, hey, let's insert one to the right, and boom, there it is. There's a column to the right. Or I could have clicked on column B and I could have right clicked and said insert one to the left. Boom, there it is, and that would work as well. That's probably the easiest ways. There are other options up here, like there's insert columns. You can do that left and right as well if you prefer the menu. I'm more of a right clicker. All right, so there we go. At this point, we now have a spot for the last names to go. So how do we split this text into multiple columns? Well, it's pretty straightforward. All you have to do is select the column first. So take your mouse and give a click on the A at the top of column A. So you select the column. And now that you've got that selected, we're going to go over here to our data menu. Told you we'd be coming to data over and over and over and over again. From the data menu, we're going to choose split text to columns. That's going to take this text and put it into multiple columns. So data, split text to columns. Now, when I do that, it's not going to split it right away. It's going to ask me, hey, Eric, what's the separator? What's the thing between the first name and last name in this case that you want me to split based on. Now, it could probably figure that out automatically, but you can also tell it, oh, there's a comma or a semicolon or a space or a period. Well, in this case, it's a space. It's first name, space, last name. So I'm going to say, yeah, there's a space between there. If it was something different, you could put in a custom thing, like if it was, comma space or something like that, you could type that in yourself. In this case, it's just a regular space, so I'll click space and boom, all done. There you go. Now I might want to come in here and rename this. This is now first name. If I could type, that would probably help. Okay, so we've got first name, and then we will have last name. All right, looks good. So there you go. And now, guess what? I can sort by last name. Now that I've got it split, I could click anywhere in this column and go Data, Sort Sheet, A to Z for column B, and boom, there we go. I've got my students now by last name alphabetical. Love it. Excellent. All right. Well, let's keep on going. Next up, we're going to talk about filtering data. So in this case, what we're talking about is being able to reduce the data we're looking at. Sorting was great. Sorting is fantastic to put data in order so you can see, what's the highest, what's the lowest, things like that, like who's doing well on a test, who's struggling. Filtering's a little different. What it's going to do is it's going to say temporarily hide data that doesn't fit my criteria. And you can do this by one column or you can do it by multiple columns. Let's take a look at how filtering works. So let's say I go, you know what, this is all great, but at the moment, I just want to look at my 10th graders. Let's say I just want to see my 10th graders. Now, certainly I could sort by grade 10 and just scroll to that section. But what if I'm like, no, that's all I want to see. I just want to see the 10th graders. I don't need to see anything else temporarily. Let's hide the rest of the data. That can be really useful if you have a large amount of data and you're trying to narrow it down to a subcategory, a group within that overall data. So let's say it's grade 10 students. Okay, well, to do a filter, what we need to do is turn on the filter tool. So if I go up to data, you'll see there's a create a filter option. Now, as I show you these examples, I guarantee you there's probably like 5 different ways you can turn on a filter. There's probably 5 ways you can do everything I'm showing you. Most of the time I'm going to show you my preferred method, but there are typically other ways, right-clicking and so many other things. But in this case, I would just go to data and create a filter. And when I do that, notice what happens. As soon as I hit create a filter, the screen is going to look different. Here we go. Boom, look at that. Yeah, all of a sudden, there's these little arrows at the top of all of my columns. That's the filter that we've just turned on. So basically what it means is now that I've got filtering turned on, I can go to the column, for example, student ID, and I can click that little down arrow next to it, and look at that. It is now telling me, okay, here's all of the student IDs. Which ones do you want to see or don't you want to see? Or which class periods do you want to see or don't you want to see? Or which grade levels do you want to see or don't you want to see? So that gives us this drop down where we can filter the data to just the part we want to look at. So let's say we want to do those grade 10 like we were saying. Okay, so we're going to say, just show me grade 10. That's pretty easy now. I click on grade level and I say, let's uncheck grade 9. Let's uncheck 11. Let's uncheck 12. So I'm just leaving 10 selected. When I hit OK, it should reduce it down. Let's see. There it is. Yep. Now, the other data is not gone. I mean, it's still there. It's safe. Don't panic. It's still there. But it's saying temporarily we're just going to look at grade 10. And now I can just focus on that subset, and I'm good to go. At any point, of course, I can click on that filter. I could select everything back again, hit OK, and it's all there. I could also just turn off the filter and everything will come back as well, which I guarantee you're going to forget to do at some point. There's going to be some point where you go in and you say, you know what, let's do a filter, and then you're going to work on it and then just close out of your spreadsheet and then come back later and be like, oh, where's my data? Because the filter will stay on. So be aware, you will want to go back and turn it off again later. Now you can also do stacked filters, multiple filters. So I've already said, hey, let's reduce this down to grade 10. What if I said, and additionally, let's reduce this down to just our, third period students. So I could say, let's uncheck the 7, just leave the 3rd, hit OK. And now I've got grade 10 students that are in 3rd period. And I could go further and say, and only show me those who ride the bus. And so I could say, okay, let's go with true for rides the bus. And there we go. So now I've got that down to this very small subset. What's nice about that is when you do get it narrowed down to exactly what you're looking for, you can actually just copy this. I could come here, take my mouse, copy, select and copy. So select and copy this. And then I could just paste that into a new tab or a Google Doc or whatever. I'll just do a new tab. I'll hit the little plus button down here to add a new sheet at the bottom. I can now go edit paste and I can just paste that in. And now I have this little subset permanently there that if I ever need to refer to it, I've got that information. Typically, I'd probably paste it into like a document or something like that to share with somebody. Maybe they need to see this particular information and I'm pulling that out for them. All right. Now, again, when you're done, you can individually go through and change those filters, or you can just turn off the filter. If you just go Data, Remove Filter, boop, everything's back to normal. Excellent. Now, there is one other way to filter. Well, there's many other ways. There's one other I was going to show you. So instead of the way we filtered, where I individually clicked and unclicked to say, I want this grade, I don't want that grade, there is another option, and that's filtering by condition. So let's turn the filter back on. So Data, create a filter. And this time, and I tell you what, let me freeze our names again. I want to get those refrozen there. Whoops, sorry about that. So I want to get those refrozen because I think they, there we go. That way I don't lose who I'm looking at here. So let's scroll over to the side here. And let's say we want to filter by score. So let's say I go, you know what? I just want to look at any student who scored below a certain value. I just, at the moment, don't want to see everybody. I just want to look at those that maybe, I don't know, scored a 70 or below. Well, in that case, I can click on the little down arrow here. And sure, I could go in and manually uncheck every score I don't want. I mean, I could do it. It's not that bad. But again, I've only got like 20 some records here. You may be dealing with spreadsheets that have hundreds or thousands of records, and that would just be ridiculous to spend all that much time. So notice, that's filtering by values. You don't have to filter by values. Instead, you can filter by condition. So if I do that, basically, I'm going to create a rule that says, I want to filter down to only things that meet a particular rule or condition that I'm setting. So right now it says none. I could click there and say, okay, what are my rule options? And these are the different options I have. Like, only show me cells that are empty or are not empty. Only show me cells that contain certain text or have a certain date or have a certain value. Well, that's what I want. I want a certain value. I want less than or equal to. That's the one I'm looking for. So just show me scores, show me records where the score in column N is less than or equal to, let's say 70. That's our cutoff. Now when I hit OK, that rule is going to get applied, and there we go. I've now only got scores that are 70 or below. That is a conditional filtering. When done, as always though, you can just go to your data, turn off the filter, and you're back to normal. All right, so that's filtering, a great way to take a large amount of data and make it more digestible by just looking at a portion of it. Next up, formulas. Okay, now we're moving into the deeper end of the pool. So as this session goes, we're starting off with some basic things, and yeah, heads up, it's going to get more and more challenging as we go through. But again, hopefully it'll be beneficial to you as you learn these new skills to apply in your daily job. Let's talk about formulas and functions. Okay. So basically, Google Sheets allows you to add formulas or functions that will act upon the data to average data or give you the minimum, the maximum, the range, lots of things like that. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of functions that are available for you to use. We're just going to do two. We're going to do average and cross lookup. Those are the two we're going to look at. Average is pretty basic. It's a pretty introductory one. Cross lookup, that's definitely deep into the pool, but I want to put it in just to show you the variety here. So we're not just doing a simple example. We're also doing one that's a little bit more challenging. If you don't want to do that one, that's totally fine, but I'm going to go ahead and just show you both ends of the spectrum. Let's start with something like just the average function. And let's say that's what I want to do, that I want to say, you know what? I would love to get an average of my students' scores here. Over here, I want to see at the moment what is their current average. And I don't want to do that myself. I don't want to take the time to add these up and divide by 6 and get this average. Well, you don't have to. You can have the spreadsheet do it for you. So let's do it. I'm going to start off by putting a header description here in column O of just the word average. Now that's doing nothing for the spreadsheet. That's just for me. That is in no way causing an average to appear. That is literally just a label, so I know that's what the column represents. What we're going to do next, that's what's going to make the average happen. Okay, so in this cell O2, now you may not have it in column O if you didn't add in different things that I've done, but in mind it's column O. That's where I want to put in the average. Now, how do you put in a formula or a function? Well, that's the key. That's the thing. You start by pressing the equals sign because that lets it know, hey, this isn't a number. This isn't a word. This is a function or a formula. That's what separates it. So if I go to that cell and I press the equal sign, automatically it goes into function mode where it's waiting to be given a function. Now in my case, it is suggesting a function, and actually it is correct. that is what I want to do. And here's the thing. Technology is getting better and better and better all the time. We're getting to a spot where you're probably not going to have to know as much about like, well, you know, what is the proper syntax for this formula, because Google Sheets can figure out a lot of it just from the context. I'm going to go ahead and do it longhand though. I will fill this out by hand just so you can see the process. But yeah, the suggestion it is given here, if I pressed my tab button, it would actually accept the suggestion. That is in fact what we're trying to do. We're trying to get an average from cell I2 all the way over to cell N2. That's what the little colon in between those means. It means inclusive between those from I2 to N2. So that is what I want, but I'm going to go ahead and just show it to you longhand. So if that didn't pop up, if that did not appear there, what I would probably start doing is typing in the formula. Well, if you want to find the average of something, yes, the formula is average. So I could just start typing in A, V, E, and as I'm typing in the word average, notice it is suggesting to me, did you want average? Do you want, average A, average if, average weighted? There's tons of different average formulas out there. Well, I just want the regular old average, so nothing fancy about it, just regular old average. And then what I want to do, and I can select that. I can pick, average from the list if I want to. That's fine. It's still suggesting what it wants to go inside, and it is still right. But again, I'm still going to do it longhand just so you can see the process. So typically, formulas start this way. You give them an equal sign. You give them the name of the formula. And usually then you've got a set of parentheses. The set of parentheses hold the data that you're applying the formula to. So in this case, inside these parentheses, it wants me to say, what do I want to average up? Now, if you can't remember how a formula works, there's typically a little guide right below there. You can expand that out and it will talk you through, hey, this is what this formula does. It gives you the average of a data set, and it explains, what you want to do is put in the first cell and the last cell, a colon in between, and ta-da, it'll do it for you. So in this case, that's what I want to do. Cell I2 is the first cell, so I would type in I2. And yes, I know it's already in there. I'm just showing you by hand. And then the colon. And then where do I want the average to end? Into. So into ends it. Whoops. Sorry. Did it capitalize that? Probably doesn't really matter. And there you go. And that's it. Okay, I know I just retyped what was already in there, but I want to show you yourself can literally just type in that if it didn't appear automatically for you. And that's it. Just go ahead and press enter and ta-da! It's done. There it is. That's the average. These cells, these 6 values, average to 71. That's what they become. Now you may say, okay, that's great, Eric. I'm glad it did that, but that's a bit of work. Honestly, it's really not. I mean, I took my time to do it, but really in real time, it would not take that long. So if I were to start from scratch and just hit equals, I could, obviously I could just select what it suggested and I'm done. Or I could hit equals, start typing in average, and then just select the cells I want. I don't have to type them in. I can just take my mouse and click and drag across, and that will fill them in. Press enter, done. As simple as that. Now it is suggesting autofill. You could say yes, absolutely. I'm going to say no just to show you another way to fill this, but oh yes, you could just say, yep, let's autofill, and blah, 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 blah. It'll do it right down the line there for you. So the point is really, it doesn't actually take that long. I just took a little bit of time to go through the steps. So now I've got the average for a single row. What about all the other data? Do I have to redo that over and over and over and over again? No, of course not. So all you need to do is click on the cell where you put that average in, and basically we want to copy that down here. Now you can do that a couple ways. I mean, I literally could copy it. I could say, let's copy, and then come here and say paste, and it will do that. Now notice it's a different number. Why? Because it's pasting the formula into a different row. This formula was average I2 to N2. When I pasted it here, it became average I3 to N3. It's pretty smart, right? It realized it was a new row, so it updated the reference there. If you're not a copy-paste person, no worries. Just click on the cell and notice this little teeny blue circle in the bottom corner. That's a handle. If you click, hold down, and drag the handle down, it'll pull that formula down as well. Or even better, if you double click on the little blue circle, it'll copy down until it runs out of data to apply to. That's it. You got it. We could do a little cleanup at this point. We might say, let's click on the average column, and maybe I want to center things. So, I could come here and find my center option so it's a little prettier. And then, I don't need all these decimal places. So I could select the column and come up here, and here's where I can increase or decrease decimal places. So I could decrease them and then maybe pop them out to, 2 places, 1 place, whatever I decide makes the most sense. Now, the cool thing about formulas is they're live. So right now, this data is being pulled from this data over here. So let's say I changed something. Let's say the student, Corey, came and redid this test, and it was a 55, but now it became something else. Well, the average will automatically update if I change anything the average is pulling from. So if I take this 55 and say, hey, Corey retook this, did a great job, got an 82 on it. Once I press enter, this number here should change. Let's see, press enter. Yep. Now we're up to a 75.5 because it is a live updating average. All right, good stuff. Now, if that's all you want to know about formulas, you're good. That's the basics. That's the basic of it, is that, you press an equals key and you type in the formula you want, and it does the job for you. If you want to learn about more formulas, there's loads of ways to do that. One easy way is to go to your help menu, and from the help menu there's a function list option that'll take you to a page where you can explore through all of the functions that Google Sheets supports. There's a lot, heads up. So if I click on that, it takes me to that page, and yeah, I've never counted these, but it's impressive, whatever it is. It's definitely hundreds of functions. I don't know how many there are there, but an awful lot. And then, of course, you can narrow down and say, hey, I'm looking for a function that helps me find the maximum of something. And if you type in like max, it'll be like, oh, well, do you want the max function? Oh, yeah, I do want the max function. Click here to learn more about it. And it says, this brings back the maximum value, and it explains how it works and so forth. So that's a nice way to learn about more of them. Another suggestion I would have for you, if you go back to the agenda document, On page 2 of the agenda document, there is a link I have here to Ben Collins's website. Ben is he's a master when it comes to Google Sheets and anything spreadsheet related. He's got a lot of really good support content here on functions and lots of things like that. So if you head over to benlcollins.com, go to his website, he has got so many amazing posts there, and many times talking about, functions and explaining step by step how those functions work. You can come over here and just search for a function that you're interested in. He also does courses. He's got a lot of free courses as well that you can take. So I think Ben's a great resource. And then also, if you're an AI person, AI is fantastic for this. If you use ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or Copilot or whatever, if you're trying to come up, you're like, oh, I want to do this formula, but I don't remember. How does that formula work, or how do I write it? Just go talk to AI. I did put in here a little quick sample document of some chats I had with AI to help me with Sheets formulas. If you follow that link under the general resources here, that'll take you to that page where I just showed some examples. And some of them are more complicated. Some of them are really basic. But here's a really basic one here. I basically said, hey, I need a Google Sheets formula to check to see if a cell is any one of the following 3 values. It can be a 3, a 4, or a 5. I just want to know. As long as it's one of those, let me know. If it's not a 3, 4, or 5, I'm not interested. And I was like, how do I do that again? And it said, oh yeah, you could just use the OR function. You could say equals OR and then put inside of there all the 3 options for it, and then that would work. I said, oh, awesome. I said, well, what about this? What if it's, I want to see if the cell's greater than or equal to 3, and I want it to be less than or equal to 5. Oh, yeah, sure. You could do an and, where you say it's greater than 3 and it's less than 5. And the point is, you can just have a conversation and just go back and forth, and ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude will help build that formula for you. Then you can bring it back over to your spreadsheet and put it in there. You might have to adjust a few things so it lines up with your columns, putting in the right column letters and so forth, but that can be a big help. All right, I did say that I would show cross lookup. Fair warning, this is the deep end of the pool. So if you want to look away, you can. You don't have to watch this, but I'm just going to show you. I just wanted to give you an example of a more sophisticated function just for comparison's sake. All right. So what is cross lookup? So here's basically the way it works. Let's say I've got this data here, and I want to add in some new data. So let's put in a column to the right here. Oops, sorry about that. Try that one more time. Insert column to the right. There we go. There we go. And so let's say that I wanted to add some more information here into this column. And what I'm wanting to add is this. Let me pop over to this ID tab I have here. Let's say that all of my students, they have school IDs, but it turns out they also have a state ID, like maybe when they're taking state tests, they get a unique ID that the state gives them different than the ID we give them in the school. And I need to match those up. I need to take my student IDs and I want to find the state ID that each student has. And this particular tab here, I've got like 200 pretend students. So let's say this is our entire grade level, all 200 students in our grade level. This is their IDs. This is their state IDs. And what I want to do is I want to add those in here. I want to have state ID for my small group of students. I've got 27 students here. So I want to put the corresponding state ID that goes with each of my student IDs. Well, first of all, that could be a lot of work manually. I mean, I could do it. I could say, okay, let's grab my first student. Let's copy my first student. Let's go here. Let's do a search. Let's put my student's ID in. Oh, it's this one. Now let's copy that. Let's come back over. Now let's paste it in. You get the idea. I could do that. But Oh my gosh, that's going to take a long time. That does not sound fun to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth doing that. Well, that's what cross lookup does for you. It does the lookup for you. It's a great formula, really powerful, does some neat things. So let's take it for a quick spin. Now again, heads up, if you don't want to watch this, you don't have to, but let me just show you basically how a more advanced function is going to work. So I'm going to put in the equal sign as normal. I'm going to type in cross lookup. And I'm going to select cross lookup, and it's saying, okay, let's do it. So what cross lookup does is it follows this pattern. It basically needs three main things. It needs, first of all, the search key. What do you want me to look up, Eric? What's the thing I'm trying to look up? Well, I'm trying to look up the student's ID. That's the thing I'm trying to look up, is go find the student ID somewhere else. And then it's going to be, well, where do you want to look for that in? Well, I'm going to tell it, I want you to go to this other tab and look for it there. And then results. What do you want me to bring back? I need to show it the column to bring back. So let's do that. So first of all, XLOOKUP, what is the search key? Well, it's literally the student ID. So I'm going to simply click on D2. I could type D2, but I'll just click D2, and there it is. Ta-da. Okay, so that's the first thing is filled in. Search key is D2. Look at that. Next, lookup range. Where should it try to find the student ID? Well, I've got a tab called ID, and you do too. If you made a copy of my template, you have an ID tab as well. In that ID tab, I want to grab column A. So I'm going to click on column A. Boop, there it is. It just filled that in, basically saying, look in column A to find the student ID. I'm going to press a comma because that gives me, commas go in between each of the different parameters that we're putting in here. So D2 was the search key. The lookup range was column A on tab ID. Now, what's the result range? What do we bring back once it finds a match? Well, it brings back whatever is sitting next to that number in column B. So the result range is, boop, column B. And that's it. Now there's other things there's other optional parameters. If I hit my little comma, you'll see I can also do, what about missing values? What about blah, 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 blah. Well, it's actually fine. This will be fine for what we're doing here. So I'm just going to stop there. At this point, if I go ahead and press enter, whoops. Oh, sorry about that. I should have pressed enter before I left. Oh, I did. Oh, good. It's there. I was going, I moved over and thought I lost it there. I didn't lose it. Good. And there it is. It did it. And so here is XLOOKUP, D2, then go grab that from column A and bring back column B. And it did it. Look, it brought it back. And is that one right? Is that the right value? Let's double check. Let's copy this. Let's come over here and look again and see. Should be 9490023. 949. Yep, it was. Perfect. And now here's the beauty. Guess what I can do? I can drag that down, or I can double click to copy it down, and XLOOKUP is doing the work for me. Isn't that great? It's looking at the ID. It's popping over here, finding the ID, finding the state ID, and bringing the state ID back, saving you so much time. So, folks, we could spend hours just on formulas and functions. We're not going to. We've got other things to look at, but that is just a teeny little taste of the amazing power that formulas have and can help you with. All right, let's keep moving. So what's up next? Charts and graphs. Probably won't spend a lot of time on this. It's pretty straightforward, but let's do an example of a chart so you can see what that would look like. So let's say I wanted to make a chart of my students' average grades. Makes total sense. I want a bar chart, like that thing that shows how many students are getting, an A, a B, a C, a D, that sort of thing. So let's do that. Well, here's what I usually do. When I'm doing a chart or a graph or something, I typically like to start by selecting the data first and then opening up the chart wizard. That way I've already got the data selected and it knows what I'm working with. You can select it afterwards, but again, I think it's easier to start this way. So I'm going to select column, the average column, which for me is column P. Might not be for you, but it is for me. With that selected, I'm going to go up to the Insert menu and choose Chart. I want to insert a chart. Now when I do that, it's going to try to guess what it thinks I want, okay? And so it's saying, okay, well, I think you probably want a column chart. And tell you what, let me zoom out just a bit temporarily just so we can see things a little bit better. Sometimes I'll zoom back in later, but just for now, I'm going to zoom out just so we can see a little bit better what we're looking at, because what it does is it actually drops a chart in progress right onto the sheet here, and I want to make sure you can actually see it. So I selected column P, I said insert chart, and what it did was it created a chart and it made some choices which might not be what I was looking for. It chose, oh, how about a column chart? Well, you may say, well, Eric, didn't you want a column chart? Didn't you want like a bar chart? Well, kind of, but this really isn't what I was thinking. This is just showing every single value that the students have for their averages. I'm really looking for something that summarizes it more. Well, that's the beauty. There's so many chart types. You can click here and say, well, okay, well, maybe that's not the one I want. Do I want a line chart? Do I want an area chart, a bar graph, a pie chart, a scatter plot? Actually, the one that I want for this, it's under the other section, is actually this one. It's called a histogram. If you don't know that, don't worry, but that's what it's called. It's called a histogram. A histogram is a bar graph where it puts things into bins. It puts things into groups, like anything from this value to this value, boop, it puts them together. So that's actually what I want, is a histogram. So I'm going to choose the histogram chart. And as soon as I do, it should already look better. And it does. You can see 55 to 64 to 73 to 82 to 91 to 100 and how many students fall within these different bins. Now, I don't like those divisions that it's given me there, so I will change that. But hey, we're headed the right direction now. Because here's the thing, you can always customize it more. There's a Customize tab up here where you can go in and you can tweak anything, titles, colors, whatever. I want to change the size of the different buckets or bins that it's dividing things up into. So I'm going to go to the histogram option. And from there, you'll see bucket size is set at auto. Let's put bucket size at 5. So every 5 points. Looks good. So now I can see, 55 to 60, 65 to 70, 95 to 100. I can see how many students have scores within each of those. And that's it. Now, obviously, you can do way, way more than that, but that's the basic idea. After that, of course, you can adjust this chart any way that you want. What to do with the chart, though, now that you've got it? Well, first of all, you probably don't want it sitting on top of your data. So you can click on it and you can move it around. Just be careful that you don't grab the items inside of there. Just grab like a white space. That way it's easier to move. And you could just move it over to the side or down below or something like that. Then people could just scroll over to see it. That's fine. That works fine. You can do that. What I think is really helpful, though, is to put it on its own tab. So it gets its own tab just by itself, and you can see it better. The easiest way to do that is just click on the chart, click on the 3 dots button, and then choose Move to Own Sheet. That will take that chart and boop, put it on its own tab at the bottom. Let's do that. And there we go. Awesome. So here's my data sheet, which is the way it was just a moment ago with no chart. And now there's a tab next to it called Chart 1. And there is my beautiful graph. Awesome. It's ready to go. And of course, you can download the chart. I could copy the chart and I could paste it into a Google document. A lot of options there. But that's the gist behind charts. I'm going to zoom back in. So I had to zoom out just a bit there just because the chart wound up in a funny spot. But we'll get back in. All right, what's up next? Sparklines. Well, sparklines kind of are charts. They're sort of like if a chart and a formula had a baby. It would make a sparkline. A sparkline is actually a formula, but it's a formula that creates a chart. So basically, it's a formula that sits inside of a single cell, and inside of that cell, it renders a graph, a line chart inside. Oh, well, you can do different types of charts, but typically a line chart. And it's really great for showing trends. So let's do that. Let's say I am looking at my students' scores here, and I go, you know what? This is great. I can see all their scores, but something visual might help. if I could visually see what their scores look like, maybe I could catch like, oh, this student seems to be on a downward trend. Their scores are getting lower over time. Or, wow, this student sure seems erratic. Really high, really low. What's going on there? Well, that's where something like a Sparkline, helping you visualize data, it can help you catch students that might be at risk. And that's what this whole thing is about. I mean, yeah, I know we're talking about formulas and things and whatever, but honestly, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about this data. It's meant to represent students. It's meant to represent their learning, their achievements, their struggles. The better we can understand the data, the better we can support our students. Ultimately, that's what it's about. Anything that helps you get the data clearer so you can identify students at risk and help them, that's the plan. So let's try a quick Sparkline over here. So I'm going to go to column Q and I'm going to type in the word trend, because that's basically what I'm doing. I'm looking for the trend, and I'm going to type in my Sparkline function. Remember, press the equals, because equals does functions. And I'm going to start typing in the word spark, and there it is, Sparkline, a miniature chart within a cell. Well, all the Sparkline needs is the data. What's the data to make a graph out of? And I want to take score 1 through score 6. I'm not going to include the average, because that's an average. I just want to see their raw scores. So I'll click from J2 over to O2, and that's it. Sparkline from J2 to O2, press enter, and there's the Sparkline. I can now double click to fill that down, and look at that. I've got a little graph now, and I can see for all of my students, like, oh yeah, Harry does seem to be having a little bit of a trouble. The grades are, in general, just really falling there. I better see what's going on. Harry started out so strong, I may not have noticed that. If I had not seen that graph, maybe I would have missed that, where there's other students that are very erratic in their scores, whatever the case might be. So this can be a nice way to visualize that. Another way to visualize things, though, conditional formatting. So again, we're just talking about how can I look at this giant screen of numbers and not miss important things. I want stuff to pop out at me and get my attention. Well, conditional formatting can do that. So basically what this does is it colors the cells. Well, you could do other things, bold, italicize, etc., but usually it's color. We typically color cells that meet a certain condition. So for example, I could say, hey, I want to see any student who is scoring, a 70 or below, or a 65 or below, or whatever my cutoff is. I want to be alerted that those students are at risk. I want their scores to actually be red so it jumps out at me. Now, you could have other reasons why you're filling things in. That's just the example I'm using for this. So let's do that. Let's say that anytime any of these scores here, score 1 through 6, if any of these fall below a cutoff, we'll say 70 and below. We'll just go with that. We'll say if you score a 70 or below, I want the cell to be red so that I realize, that's a student who's struggling with that particular test. So here's the way it works. First of all, I like to start by selecting the cells, because that's just easier to have them already selected. So I'm taking my mouse and I'm grabbing those 6 columns. With those selected, I'm now going to go to the Format menu. And from the Format menu, I'm going to go down to Conditional Formatting. This is where I'm going to be able to pop open a little panel on the side and give it the rule I want it to follow and the color I want it to color things in. So let's do that. So click on Conditional Formatting, and boop, there it is, pops up this little panel. So this panel basically does 3 things. It says, what's the range, what's the rule, and what's the formatting. Now, I already selected them, so it knows the range. If it didn't, I could go in and do that right now, but that's why I pre-selected it. So it knows from J to O, boom, that's the range. What's the rule? Well, this should look familiar. We talked about rules when we did filtering. If I click on what is the rule here, it's the same as we saw before. Is it empty or not? Does the text contain certain things? Is it a certain date? Is it a value that's greater than or less than or between? Well, I want to again do the less than or equal to approach. So I'm going to say, okay, anytime something in here is less than or equal to, and let's put in that same cutoff, let's say 70. If it's less than or equal to 70, I want to apply a format. Now it's using green as the default. That's fine. That's totally fine. But you could say, no, let's make it, yellow or red. You could go in and say, let's make it bold or italicized or underlined or whatever. I'll just say, you know what, let's just make it red. That's fine. Let's just make it red. And that's it. I can now hit done. And now it's going to automatically color code those anytime a score falls 70 or below. And I can add more rules. I could say if it's above this, do that. If it's between this, do that. You can have multiple colors and multiple rules. But the beauty of this is it's dynamic. So if a student again, retook a test. If they're like, okay, they were struggling, but they went in and they retook this test. It was a 58, but they ended up getting a 78 on the retake. When I press enter, it's no longer red. It turns white, and vice versa. If I took something from a high number to a lower number, it would turn red. So conditional formatting can be a great way, again, to help us see students that might be at risk. Next up, data validation. Now this one's a little different than the other ones we've been looking at. This is one where we are controlling new data that we're putting into the sheet. Almost everything we've been doing so far, a lot of it's been analyzing the data that's already there. This is to help improve the accuracy of the new data we put in. Here's what I mean. Let's say I wanted to add a homeroom column, and we could do it anywhere. I mean, it could be on the end. We'll just put it here because probably that makes sense. It wouldn't be mixed in with the grades. So let's insert a new column, and let's say we want a homeroom column. And let's say I wanted to have the students' homerooms here. Now, obviously, I can just type them in. There's nothing that's going to stop me from just typing in their homerooms here. Here's where things can be a challenge. If I'm just allowed to type in the homerooms, what if I don't always type them consistently? Let's say, some homerooms are like homeroom 101, 103, whatever. That's fine. But what if there's some homerooms that are like R1, R2? I remember when I taught at a school, we had such rooms, M1, M2, R1, R2, things like that. Well, what if one time I type it in R1, another time I type it R-1, another time I type it R-1, or what if even like room 101? What if sometimes I type room 101 and other times I just type 101? The point is, if I'm not consistent as I put the data in, that can bother me in the future, because if I don't have these consistent, like again, if this was, R1 and this was R-1 and this was R-1, the problem is, what can't I do? I can't filter as easily now. If I come in here and say, hey, let's filter by everybody who's in homeroom R1, well, it's not going to catch them all because I've got different versions of that. So data validation is designed to help protect you from doing that. And so here's the way it works. What you do is you select the column you want to apply the data validation to, or columns. In this case, it's just a column, but you select the column that you want to apply it to. And we're going to come up here and go to our data menu. And from our data menu, we're going to choose data validation. Now, when I click on that, it's going to pop up a panel just like we've seen over and over and over again. So here is our data validation panel, and I can say I want to add a rule just for this particular column. And when I go to add the rule, it's going to say, okay, sure, we can do that. And it's going to give me an option to have a drop-down menu here. And in that drop-down menu, it's going to say, what do you want the values to be? What are acceptable values that can be selected here? Now, I don't really need the first cell I1 included in there. So technically, I guess I could change my range from I1 to I2, because really I don't actually need that included in there, just from I2 on down. So I don't have to do that, but I'm just going to adjust my range I2 down to the bottom of I. And then basically I could say, you know what? This is what's acceptable. We could do room 101. We could do room, 103. We could do R1. You get the idea. I could start filling in acceptable values in here so that when somebody comes over here and clicks on this, they'll see those are your choices. You're not typing something in, you're selecting something from the drop down there. So you can just go in and just manually type those in there. In addition, you can change colors if you want to color code different, homerooms or different things have different colors. That's fine. Keep adding as many items as you want. You can also come in here and change what it looks like. Like, do you want it to be the chip style or the arrow style or just plain text? I typically do the arrow style, but it's really up to you. Whatever you want's fine. And you can also decide whether or not people are allowed to type in something that doesn't fit. Can they override it, or do you reject the input? And there you go. If I hit done, now anytime I come into this column, I'm like, this student is in homeroom 101, they're in R1, they're in 103, this one's in 103. You get the idea. I don't have to type them in anymore because they're already filled in there for me. If you really want to get fancy, and you don't have to, but if you really want to get fancy here, let me show you something you can do here. If I go back to that data tab and I go back to my data validation, I can go back in and I can edit this rule. So this is the rule that we have. And here's one little tweak you can do. This works great. This is perfect. But if you don't want to type up every individual room here, because maybe they're going to change next year and you need new rooms, you can actually have another tab in your spreadsheet where you have all the rooms already listed, or genders, or race, or ethnicity, or whatever it is you're trying to pull from. You can already have them typed up somewhere else, and then you can tell the data validation to just pull that data into here automatically for you. And so I did that. I've got, and you do too, if you have a copy of the template, you have a tab called menus. So what I can do is I can say, you know what, let's not do a drop down. Let's do a drop down from a range. And if I choose that, it's basically going to say, okay, sure, you tell me where the data comes from. You pick the data, you show me where the data comes from, and we're good to go. So I can say, sure thing, let's select, and I'll come over here, I'll click on column D, and I'll say that is the range, that is the range that I want. Actually, I'll just grab the whole column. So I'm going to say grab the entire column D, anything in there. I'll hit OK. And look at that, it auto-populates it for us. So now that is going to say those values are all available as a drop-down pulled from this range. When I hit done on that and I head back over here, now when I click on any of these, awesome. I've got R1, I've got R2, I've got 101, I've got 110. And the beauty of this is you can just add a new one anytime you want. Come over here and say, turns out this year we had a bigger class, so now room 210 is available. So now I'm adding 210 to the list for the menus. Guess what, guys? 210 is in the list here now too, because it's automatically pulling it in. Pretty slick. All right. Well, let's pause there for a second. Everything that we've just looked at there, all of that, those are what we were going to do in student data template 1. That's student data template number 1. That hits loads of things we've looked at, data validation, conditional formatting, Sparklines, charts and graphs, formulas, filtering, sorting, view options. All of those came from that first example. I do have, as I mentioned before, student data template number 2. I am going to go ahead and demonstrate this. I will let you know this is really the deep end of the pool. This is the most sophisticated thing I'm going to show you this entire session. So again, if that's not what you're interested in, no worries. Maybe you got everything that you needed just from this student data template number 1, and you want to implement those things. But for those that want to take one more step deeper in the pool, I do want to talk briefly about pivot tables and how those work and how valuable they can be for you. So for those that are continuing along with that, what we want to do is we want to go back to our resource document. We want to go back to page 2. And if you haven't yet, we do want to get a copy of template number 2. So let's give a click on there, and let's make a copy of template number 2. Let's go ahead and pop that open there. And let me explain what this is, because it'll make a lot more sense if we understand what the data is we're looking at, and then I can explain just what a pivot table is and why on earth, why you would ever want to use something like this. All right, so let's do that. So what is the data? What is student data number 2? So basically this is, again, it's all pretend data, but it's data that comes from this form. So this is the form that I created to generate this data. And it's really basic, but let's say it's a check-in form. Let's say every day at the end of class, I want my students to do a quick reflection on how well did you understand what we covered today in class. I want them to put their name in here, then I want them to rate themselves from 1, I don't get it, to 4, I completely understand it, or somewhere in between. Now, in reality, I would do a much more sophisticated example than this. I'm keeping it really simple just so you get the idea behind it. But that's what I had. So here's the form, and that fed this. So you can see, like, on this particular day, here's the students who said what their ratings were as to how well they understood. And notice, day after day, they show up again. So here's, Jim on this day, and here's Jim again, and here's Jim again. So, every day, hopefully, the students are in class and they're filling this out. So what I've got here is I've got this list of my students over a period of time explaining how well they understood what I covered that day. What if I want to look at that data in more of a summary? That's what pivot tables do. They summarize large amounts of data into a small, simple to understand chart. That's what a pivot table is. If you have a ton of data, a pivot table can summarize it. It can organize it and make it easier to understand. Because what I'd like to know is, over all this time, are there some trends? Do some of my students seem to really grasp what I'm teaching and others don't? Well, here is the sneak peek of what we're going to create. So this is what the end result's going to look like. When we're all done, that is what we're going to get. So basically, it should look like this. We should have a chart that lists all of our students, and then it should show the different possible understanding ratings, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then it should show for each student how many times they chose each. So I can see Noah is 3 or has chosen 3 7 times and chosen 4 4 times, so seems to be very comfortable with what we're covering. Even more so for Sarah, she's got 9 4s and 2 3s, whereas some of the other students like Jim leaning more toward the low end, Rick kind of all over the place there. And yes, for what it's worth, I know these are puns, and yes, I did intend that cerebellum is very smart, know a lot as well, and Ricochet is bouncing all over the place. I feel like I kind of have to acknowledge that fact that yes, I put way too much thought into the silly names and how I have used them here. Nevertheless, what we want to do is show how do you build something like that? How do you take this data and wrangle it into such a beautiful graph as this? That again, what's the point? It's taking data that represents real students and understanding who needs our help. How can we best support our students? That's the whole point of all of this. So how does it work? Well, it works by creating what's called a pivot table. So let's do it. Let's take our data here, and let's make a pivot table. So what I'm going to start by doing is selecting the data I want to use, which is columns B and C. I don't really need the timestamp for this example. I'm just trying to summarize my students' names and their ratings. I mean, it's okay, I could include it, but I'm not actually going to use that in this particular chart here. So I select B and C, and then I'm going to go up to the Insert menu, and I'm going to choose Pivot Table. Now, when I click on Pivot Table, it's going to ask me, okay, this is the data you picked. Do you want to put this into a new sheet? I typically say yes. I like to have it in its own tab down here. That way it's a little bit easier to pop back and forth. So I'm going to say, yep, a new sheet is good. When I hit Create, we should get a whole new tab here for the Pivot Table. So I hit Create, and there it is. Yep, that's what it did. So I still have my first tab. There's all the data, but now I have a Pivot Table tab, and this is where we're going to build this end result. So how do we take that and get it to look like this? Well, we do it by working through 4 things here. Oh, it's giving us some suggestions here. We'll just go. We'll do this one manually. Again, Sheets often tries to help you. We're going to do this one manually. So we have 4 options: rows, columns, values, and filters. And we can click Add next to each of these to start adding rows, columns, values, and filters to build this. Let's begin with rows. So basically, rows. Okay, that would be the students' names. That's what the rows are: Jim, Noah, Paige, Rick, Sarah. Okay, so when I say I want to add rows, I'll click Add, and it'll say, okay, what should the rows be? Should it be their names, or should it be the ratings they gave for their understandings? No, it should be their names. So for rows, we click Add, Name, and boop, there we go. And that's it. Jim, Noah, Paige, Rick, Sarah. They're all filled in. So that's our rows. How about our columns? What should go across the top? What should the columns be? Well, the columns were going to be their rating, their understanding, their possible rating values. So for columns, I'll say let's add rate your understanding. And there they are. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, it may be a little hard to see. I can always adjust this. Remember, if you don't like the size of things, you can, shrink them up a little bit there. You can center things if need be. That's totally up to you. I can come here and say, hey, let's, center align this so it's a little bit easier to see. Totally up to you, but nevertheless, there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so I've got my students, and I've got their possible ratings. We're getting closer. It's looking a little bit more like this. So what's next? Rows, columns, values. Values, that's what goes inside of here. So what are we counting up? Well, we're counting up how many times they picked these different ratings. So for values, we are using rate your understanding. The same thing we did for the columns, we're using the same thing here because we want to summarize how many times they picked 1, 2, 3, and 4. So for values, I'm going to choose rate your understanding. And there we go. It filled in that data. Let's pause for a second, though, because as exciting as that is, those numbers don't look the same as these numbers here. And yeah, they look kind of suspiciously high. Let me look at this. What did it do here? Let's see. For rate your understanding, it summed up. It used the sum option. So it added up all the values. So that means anytime somebody chose 4, if Noah chose 4 times, it added it up to be 16. That's not what I wanted. I didn't want it to add up those numbers. I wanted it to count how many times they chose them. So here's the cool thing. When you do rate your understanding, you can decide how you want to summarize it. Are you summing it? Are you counting it? Are you giving an average, a max, a min? I just want to count it. So let's just hit count. There we go. Now it's counting how many times they chose 4, 3, 2, and 1. Looks great. We are really pretty close now to having what we were trying to create. The last thing I might do is add a filter because it's pulling in some blank rows. I do have some blank rows. We don't have to, but we could say let's add a filter. And let's say, let's filter this by name and say I want to show all of my students, but I don't need the blank rows. So I could filter out the blanks. And there we go. Now that's looking pretty good. Now I think we have finally gotten to the spot where we have the students' names, we've got the different rating options, and we have the totals of how many times they rated their understanding each of these. So I can get a much clearer picture of my students' understanding. Now, of course, I can still clean this up, make it prettier, change things around, but I now have the data. And of course, that data is live. So if new data comes in here, then it automatically updates the pivot table over here. So if students kept submitting, day after day, more and more and more self-evaluations, this pivot table will just keep on summarizing those for me as new data comes in. All right. Well, at this point, I am going to pull things to a close. I will say that I do have one other thing that's included in this sheet, but it's outside the scope of what we're going to cover in this particular training, and that's mail merge. So heads up, if that is something you're interested in, way down at the bottom of our resource document, I do have a section on mail merge. It really it deserves its own session. You really need a lot more time to do mail merges than we're doing here. It would require its own session. I will let you know if you do want to poke a stick at it yourself. I've got a nice YouTube video here that talks about how to use Autocrat to do mail merges in Google Sheets. You can watch that. And then I will work on a separate training that I can hopefully link in the future that does a deeper dive into all of my examples here that I have for doing mail merges with Google Sheets. But having said that, let me zoom back out again. I was zoomed in from that spreadsheet. As we start to wrap up, first of all, I just want to say thanks. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this deep dive with me. I know your time is very valuable, but I hope this will pay dividends. I hope that the things you've learned in this session will actually save you time in the future. And like we said, ultimately, help you understand your students better, where they're at, where they're struggling, so you can identify issues and assist them. But even if you just use this to organize your life, that's fantastic. Anything that saves you time means you now have more time to do what you do best, which is to interact with students or colleagues or people that you can make a difference in their life. So hopefully that will translate to that in the future. As a reminder, everything we looked at in this session is found at bit.ly/Kurtz-data. That gets you back to that document. That document has all of my contact information at the top. It's got all of the resources from this session. It's got the templates we worked through, and then all the different features we explored. And you know what? We just barely scratched the surface. Google Sheets is way more sophisticated than we even covered, but I hope this gave you a nice firm foundation and a little bit of the deep end of the pool as well. Please stay in touch. Let me know your questions. Thanks again so much for taking the time to learn with me here today. And if you made it this far, please consider liking and subscribing, accessing all of my resources at controlaltachieve.com, and connecting with me at bit.ly/CAA-connect, where you'll find my email, social media links, newsletter, and more.